Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tiffany Feingold. You are attending the IEPs, a broad overview. I'm so excited for this discussion, as I know that many of you are probably seeking a lot of guidance and advice in this area, as I know there is always some struggles that happen as we talk to the schools through this. So very excited to have Sarah with us and to go through it. So as I mentioned, I'm Tiffany Feingold. I'm one of the co-founders of Guiding Bright Minds. And let me share a little bit, if you're not familiar at all with Guiding Bright Minds. Like I said, I recognize some of the names, so I know a few of you have been with us before on some of our webinars. And so I am a parent of a neurodivergent child, and also my husband, who's the co-founder of Guiding Bright Minds, grew up with undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD. So he was one of those children that struggled significantly through school, especially, back 15 years ago. Not a lot of recognition when it came to that. He definitely heard a lot of the words of lazy, not trying hard, defiant, even was called stupid by some teachers. And so it is heartbreaking as we see our kids struggle when there's a need to support them. And it was through my husband's struggles and then watching my child go through the same thing. In a half-day kindergarten, he was in the principal's office pretty much every day. And that is heartbreaking. And so what my husband and I wanted to do was to put an organization together that helps parents on their journey. How do we connect you with those tools and resources, with those providers like Sarah, who offer services to help families in the neurodiversity community? How do we really work together to find those resources, to look at what's going on as far as events, what's going on as far as an evaluation? When you do get an evaluation, what should you expect from that evaluation? Does your child need to go to different types of therapies? What's available? It is so overwhelming and so exhausting, that journey and what it looks like. And so the purpose of Guiding Bright Minds was to build that foundation. When you go to our website, you'll see so many different articles, some that are written by Guiding Bright Minds, some that are written by our professionals that are a part of our community. And that is a way to give you those tools and resources in one place, like the 2 free webinars we have every month. What do you want to hear about? Also on our website is listing of different events that are going on, what's happening in the community, what are available both in person and virtually, because I know I have many followers and many of you that registered are not in Colorado, some are even outside of the United States. So how do you find those tools and resources? And that's what we wanted to provide. And also building that community. How do we connect together? How do we work together to help our kids, to help our parents through this process? So on the website, there is a spot that has an opportunity to ask questions, to make comments. So if there's any other topics you'd like to hear about, anything, other resources you'd like to learn about, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what I'm here for, and knowing firsthand what's that process and all of that is like is why I'm here. So thank you so much for joining. And also, if you're not a Guiding Bright Minds member, it is free to join. Then you can get updates on all those tools and resources as well. So I'll put a link to the website in there. Take a look at it, and hopefully we can connect. And like I said, please let me know if there's any other topics you'd like to hear about. So let me introduce Dr. Sarah Banks. She's a licensed psychologist and board-certified behavior analyst. She is in private practice at Basecamp Pediatric Psychology, through which she offers diagnostic evaluations for autism and parent support. Dr. Banks also recently joined the board of the Autism Society of Colorado. Her training is unique in that her doctorate is in school psychology, which involved extensive training in schools and psychoeducational assessment. Over the past several years, Dr. Banks has offered specialized neurodevelopmental evaluations. During her time as a licensed psychologist, she has helped many parents and clinicians navigate the school system and learn how to advocate for their child. She has also helped parents identify and understand their child's needs. Dr. Banks is passionate about supporting parents in their journey. So excited to have you here. I will turn it over to you, Dr. Banks, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Tiffany. I am very excited to be here and share about this topic. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Tiffany, does that look okay? Are you still there?
All right, I'm muted. It is not being shared, so I do not see.
You know, I needed to click share screen first.
There you go.
Let's see. Okay. All right. Can we see that now?
I do. We do see the presenter view.
All right.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. So, yeah, so like Tiffany said, I am a psychologist local in the Denver area. Really excited to share about this topic. This is, these are the main things that I want to talk about today. And I apologize, I do get a little nervous when I do public speaking, so I might kind of stumble in the beginning as I warm up here, so bear with me. But I really felt like these were the main things that I think a lot of parents have questions about. And I think that this is a good starting place. Guiding Bright Minds is potentially offering an IEP series in the near future. And so please know that, I know that what we talk about today is not everything. And we're really just doing a broad overview and hitting the key things that I think are important for parents to know right now. With that said as well, I think that there are a few important disclaimers and things to know. I'm no longer a certified school psychologist in Colorado, and I'm instead just a licensed psychologist. I have not worked in schools in Colorado, so I don't have specific advice or really knowledge around, the different districts or even schools within different districts. I just kind of know the things anecdotally that parents have told me. I'm also not working as an educational advocate or consultant, and so that's a very different role, and really kind of walking parents through choices for schools and IEPs and things like that. But I can speak to my own personal experience, with my background in school psychology, as well as all the parents I've helped over the years and the things that have come up, in supporting them. And also, this isn't legal advice, so if you have questions at the end that are very specific to your child's situation, I may not be able to weigh in on that just because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an educational advocate or consultant, but I will absolutely do my best to try to steer you in the right direction if you do ask questions today. All right. So first I want to touch on the IEP basics. So what is an IEP? It stands for Individualized Education Program, and it's basically a legal document. So there are federal guidelines around an IEP. It's created when a child is determined to have a disability in the educational setting that is impacting their school functioning, their progress, and they really need that extra support. If there is no impact or an IEP, evaluation determines that there's not enough impact in the school setting, then an IEP, usually is not given, and there are no specialized supports. I think the other important thing to know is an IEP is for kids 3 years old and up. So you can't have an IEP in preschool if a child is 3. If a child's younger than 3, it's a different program, still under Child Fine, but it's just not called an IEP. Also, an IEP is carried out by what's called special education, which is separate from general education in the school setting. So that means you have a specially trained special education teacher, you've got specially trained therapists providing services, and that child might be pulled out of the general education setting for some of those services. It documents a child's learning needs and where that impact of a disability is. Documents services and support, so accommodations and therapies if that child is getting them, and then also documents the goals and how we're going to measure that. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So what is an IEP not? I think this is important to know. I get questions about this all the time. So an IEP is not recommendations or suggestions. It truly is a legal document that is supposed to be implemented. So if something is documented in the IEP, it should be happening and it's not optional. Also remember that school staff are human. I truly believe that they're, for most of them at least, their hearts are in the right places. They got into this to help kids, and they may not be following an IEP, which regardless they should be, but they're human, and sometimes they may not know the IEP as well as they should, or they're unsure how to implement something, and so you might see that things are not happening the way that they're written in the IEP. It's also solely about schools. So an IEP is not going to include generally like occupational therapy your child is getting privately. It's truly about the educational setting. It's typically discontinued when a child turns 21, depending on a birthday, it could go, up to 22 years old. But it's not something that follows someone to, college, so to say, or so to speak. And it's certainly not something that's created without you. You are an important part of that IEP team, and we need parent input for, to make an IEP. And then something else that's important to remember too is if your child is in a private school setting and that school is not receiving federal funding, an IEP is not something that's going to likely be happening in that private school setting. So it truly is for public schools, charter schools, schools that are getting those federal funds. Here are some services that are in an IEP. The IEP team determines what a child needs. So, it's rare that I see an IEP where a child is getting all of these services. Usually it's through the evaluation process that they, as a team, determine, child has a medical condition, they need the nurse on there for, insulin or something like that. Or transportation, child needs a special, bus service to get to school, that's in the IEP. You could also see like communication devices in an IEP. I feel like more often than not, what I'm seeing are speech therapy, occupational therapy, and specialized instruction. And that specialized instruction is that generally that specially trained teacher at school that's pulling your child out of the general education classroom and giving them that specialized instruction, like around math or something. If a child needs a behavior intervention plan or even a safety or a crisis plan, that would be a part of the IEP as well. Sometimes the behavior specialist in the district might come in and consult with teachers. And if that's happening, then that service is in the IEP as well. Something else important to know is that you can request a service, but the team will determine if there's an actual need. Pardon me. And so you could say, hey team, I really want my child to be getting speech therapy at school. And the team could evaluate for that and say, oh, it's not really needed. And that might not make it into the IEP because that need is not there. So what is the IEP process and who is on the team? This can be a confusing process. If your child already has an IEP, you should have a parent rights manual where it outlines the different rights that you have and expectations you can have through this process. I think when a child is initially being evaluated for an IEP is when it's really, really confusing on what should be happening. Is the school in compliance with federal guidelines around timelines, or are they not? And how are you even supposed to know that if you've never been through this process? So here is typically what the process looks like. So someone, either you or someone at the school, initiates that evaluation for eligibility, and that's what it's called. This could be you saying, hey, my child was just diagnosed with ADHD or autism by an outside provider, and I want to see if they qualify for school services. And so by saying that, you're initiating that evaluation process. Sometimes what happens too is at school, a general education teacher, like say in, they're teaching reading or something, could bring it to someone else's attention at the school of, maybe there's a specific learning disability here that this child needs extra support, they're falling behind, and so they're starting that process. When someone at the school is initiating that evaluation, the school is supposed to seek your consent for that process. If you don't consent, that's a bigger topic. But if you don't consent, then the school is still in compliance with federal laws. They've tried, you've not consented, and they don't have to offer any services or determine eligibility. More often than not, probably you're interested in those IEP services. And so you're going to say, yeah, absolutely, let's consent. What does this look like? Let's get the ball rolling. And you're probably pretty eager to start. From there, the school completes an evaluation, and this is considered an educational evaluation. So again, they're looking at what's happening in the school setting. What's the impact? Is there a disability present that's having an impact? And are services needed? And so after they do that, they will have a meeting to discuss the results of the evaluation, if a child is eligible, and then really talk about what services does that child need. Occasionally, a school has what's called a response to intervention process, and that means that they might try to do an intervention over a period of like 6 to 8 weeks, like say a math intervention, to see how a child responds to that. And then they may say, hey, this kid made excellent progress with this additional support, and evaluation's not needed. Let's just give them support in the classroom and then move on. Usually, though, the results of an evaluation for eligibility through that whole process, once it's started, is that, hey, maybe there is some need. And then once everybody agrees to those things and you consent to IEP services, then services begin. And then from there, they're reviewed at least annually, meaning as a team, you're meeting to talk about progress towards goals. Is there any new area of need? How are things going? And then services can be modified as well. And then at least every 3 years, we're evaluating eligibility for services. And so, it's not once you get an IEP, you're good all the way through high school and graduation. We really are seeing every 3 years, is there still a documented need and impact of a disability? If so, does anything need to change with the plan? Something else important to know is that the IEP can be changed at any time. So don't feel like you have to wait until the annual or like every 3-year reevaluation to speak up and say like, hey, something else is happening. We need more help. And then I think what's important to remember through this process also is that an outside diagnosis does not automatically entitle your child to IEP services at school. So say I do an evaluation for you, I diagnose autism. You can take that report to the school and they have to consider that report and that diagnosis, but it doesn't automatically mean that child will start receiving specialized services. They have to do their own evaluation according to federal guidelines and then determine if there's a need at school. And then this is just a helpful visual as far as what the process looks like. I apologize if it's tiny on your screen, but the important timelines here, I think that's the biggest piece, because sometimes, schools, like I said, I think are usually well-intentioned, but may not be the most organized and or for a variety of reasons may violate the timelines for getting things done. And as a parent, like I said, how are you supposed to know that if this is your first time going through it? So typically, once the school wants to do an evaluation, you have 15 days to provide consent. Once you provide consent, the school has 60 days to complete that evaluation to determine if a child is eligible. And then within 30 days of that, you're supposed to have the IEP meeting where you talk about eligibility, or even have an IEP draft that you're reviewing and then consenting to, and then services will start. And so I think sometimes parents are disappointed at how long this can take. It can be over a 90-day process from start to finish. Hopefully the school's moving a little faster than that, but you may feel like your child is really struggling during that time and you're really eager to get those supports, and you just kind of have to wait for the school to finish their process. Other important thing to know, because I feel like I hear this a lot from parents, like if I'm doing an evaluation and I ask for the IEP and they look through all the stuff they have and they say, oh my gosh, we only have a draft IEP, or We never received the final one. You are supposed to receive that finalized IEP document at the end of this process. If you have a draft, that's no guarantee your child is getting those things. And so I always recommend getting and keeping a copy of that finalized IEP document, because that's what everybody signs and says that they're agreeing to. Few things to know. I feel like I talked about these a little bit. Anybody can initiate an evaluation. If you request an evaluation, that can't just be ignored. The school has to talk with you about that and respond. They can decide to not do an evaluation. Sometimes that happens, like if a student is on like state or district assessments scoring high enough, they might say like, no, they're doing fine. They're not in the 4th percentile, we won't evaluate, whatever the school's decision, you are entitled to an explanation of that. And so make sure that you get that if they're saying no. Like I mentioned, an evaluation usually can't be done without parent consent. There are some situations where the school might go through like due process or mediation or something to get that done. But that's a bigger topic, and you're more likely probably eager to consent and get that rolling. Eligibility is also a team decision, and you are an important part of that team. And it's important that you are vocal and advocating and participating in that process and giving your input to ensure that the team is coming to the right decision for your child. You know your child best, and so make sure that you are advocating for them. The timelines, like I mentioned, are very important. I think something else that schools sometimes don't, anticipate parents knowing is that evaluations can happen over the summer. And so sometimes what I hear from parents is like, it's May, there's 3 weeks left of school. Well, something happens, Johnny hit Bobby and now there's a suspension and things are just kind of spiraling. And the school is saying, yeah, we think, Johnny needs an IEP, but we're not going to do anything. Come back in August. We'll see how it goes. And we may evaluate then. If somebody is saying that an evaluation is necessary, they're technically not supposed to sit on that for 2 or 3 months. They're supposed to talk about that evaluation. Granted, evaluations over the summer can look a little funny, like you can't do a math intervention probably over the summer, it's a little challenging, but just certainly something to consider if you are worried that the school is going to sit on that eligibility all summer and come back August and forget about it. Advocate and say, well, let's maybe try over the summer and get something in place before August. Let's see. And then I talked about an IEP can be amended at any time. And so you don't have to wait for that yearly to say like speech therapy, we really need to increase this or something. The last thing I think that's important to know is schools sometimes have what feels like a wait to fail model, so to speak. And so you, like I mentioned, maybe speaking up, hey, something's wrong, we need help. And the school might say, well, he's not in the 10th percentile, we're not going to help. That's when it may feel like your child is falling through the cracks. And that's when you may have to really advocate even harder to get that support in that school setting. And then this is who is on the IEP team. So there is always a general education teacher. There's always a special education teacher. If a child is getting any therapies at school, like speech therapy, OT, those providers are part of that IEP team. Like I mentioned, you are also a huge part of that IEP team. You know your child best. Also, I think what's cool is that once a child reaches the age of 15, they're pulled into those IEP meetings, and we're really talking to that I was gonna say child, but that teenager about what do you want to do when you graduate? What's important to you? What can we help you with, before you get to that graduation age? And, you have to kind of spread your wings and not have that IEP support anymore. If a child is English as a second language, then you'll have a bilingual specialist. You'll also have a school administrator, like a principal is often at IEP meetings. And then you might have a specialty person too, like a school psychologist or just someone representing the mental health field. Sometimes parents have an us versus them kind of feeling with the IEP team of like, I'm just at odds with the IEP team. I don't feel like they have my child's best interest in, at heart. And I feel like the school is just kind of like not cooperating. They're out to get us or something. Ideally, it's not like that. Ideally, everyone has an equal voice and an equal part in this process, and you're being heard. If you feel like you're not, that's when it's time to maybe talk with an educational advocate to help kind of get it rolling with the IEP team. Something else helpful to know is that every child has a case manager, which can be any one of these people that are listed other than the parent. And that's the person who's organizing meetings, sending you written notices, seeking consent, and sending you that IEP document at the end as well. All right, so common IEP terms. This is a big one, especially if you've never seen an IEP before. So every IEP documents what's called a primary disability. And this could be different from like someone like me that might give a diagnosis outside of a school. There are 13 different categories for disabilities that we'll go over in just a second. But the school is always documenting a disability, and then goals and things like that are kind of driven around that. Let's see. The general curriculum is grade level stuff, that same age kids or same grade level kids are doing, and kind of what those expectations are for learning and competencies for that grade. The general education classroom is what you might refer to as like the mainstream classroom. So that's where most kids are hanging out, doing the same thing, same curriculum, and going to classes together, and they're not receiving specialized services or instruction in that classroom. And then every IEP has annual goals. And so these goals are from areas of need, which is also on this slide. So an area of need could be communication, could be social emotional wellness, physical motor, I've seen that, and then academic, like reading, writing, or math. And so, communication goal could be, Susan will learn 15 new words or, something like that, like build vocabulary or advocate for herself or use coping strategies, things like that. And then the objectives are breaking down the goal into smaller steps. So we have a big, broad goal for the year. What are we going to do to reach that goal in smaller steps? And how are we going to document that progress using those objectives? One thing on this slide is a huge thing for a lot of parents, and this comes up a lot, and it's called least restrictive environment. So every IEP will say, Susan is in the general education blank percentage, 80% of the time or something. And we're really documenting that a child is outside of the general education setting as little as possible. If they're in a different setting, here's why, and here's how we're still supporting them. And so I've got kind of a long blurb around that. I think parents often feel like their child is outside of general education more than they want. Or, on the opposite end of that could be in a setting that doesn't feel appropriate, like maybe their child has complex speech and they're in a significant needs program with children that seem, far more impacted and delayed than their child, and maybe they're not quite fitting into that setting. IEPs also document accommodations. Important to know the difference between accommodation and modification. Most kids will have accommodations in their IEPs. Fewer kids will have modifications. Modifications really are changing the learning expectations. So for example, maybe a child is in 3rd grade, but academically, they're really functioning more at like the 1st grade level. Excuse me. And so we're then modifying the curricular expectations, meaning that child is not doing grade level work, or we're changing the expectations around grade level work. And so that will be documented under modifications. most kids have accommodations, which I think one way to think of those are their supports to like level the playing field, so to speak. You know, if a child needs a seat at the front of the classroom, or you know, having visual instructions, things like that, to help them perform to the best of their ability and help them access the curriculum similar to, you know, their same age peers, then we're doing those things. And so you'll typically see a pretty long list of accommodations for a child, but like I said, modifications, you know, you see more rarely because our goal is to have a child doing grade level work. Similarly, you'll see extended school year on the IEP. This is more so for kids that have proven over time that when they have breaks from school, like summer break, that they are losing their progress they were making towards their IEP goals, or we're seeing like loss of skills when they're not in school. And so ESY services document, you know, what are we doing over those school breaks to help keep that momentum with IEP goals? And this could be for children that might need more repetition of things, you know, to learn or kind of reach the goals that we have for them. And so there has to be that documented need over school breaks. Procedural safeguards. So these are things that protect the rights of not only your child, but also of you. So like during an IEP meeting, you know, you have to sign off, I think, that you have received your booklet of parent rights and that you understand them and that someone has told them to you. And that kind of goes back to as well of like timelines around things happening. Okay. So parts of an IEP. So this looks a little funny. This is directly from the Department of Education. This is the template that they have you know, on their website, and every school has to have these components to their IEP. But the IEP documents I've seen can look wildly different as far as the template and how everything is laid out. These are still, like I said, the pieces that need to be there. Could also look different if you get a draft as well. That's why I always recommend getting that final IEP document. So every IEP meeting and document will have, whether it's an initial evaluation meeting or reevaluation. If it's an IEP review, that will also be checked. You'll have a date for the IEP meeting and the date for the IEP document itself. You will also have, may not be on this page, it may be on the next one, but that documented primary disability is what it's listed as. So what have we identified in the school setting as a disability that then is driving our services? There we go. You'll also have for every IEP what's called present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So this could be test results the school has done, intervention results. Oftentimes teachers are providing more information here too about observations, where they see the child functioning in their classroom. And there is usually a pretty nice balance of strengths that they've seen in that child, as well as things that that child needs help with. Some of this, let's see, may or may not apply depending on the child's age. Like if the child is in middle school or high school, they might interview the child, which you get some kind of cute, fun responses, you know, with those middle schoolers of what do you enjoy? And, you know, I think that's important though. And then the school should be talking to you, especially when they're making the IEP, of like, what is your child good at? What are things that you do at home that they could do at school that are helpful? And what are the struggles that you have that maybe the school is seeing too, that, you know, there might be some level of support around. And then they're always documenting the needs and then the impact of the disability, which is a lot of that. It's like a summary of a lot of that evaluation result that they're putting here to document that need. You'll see some things too, like post-school goals, you know, some of that's more so for like high schoolers. And then they're always considering special factors. So if a child has a visual impairment, if they have hearing impairment, need special transportation, need a communication device, or even like a health plan with a nurse, that type of stuff is documented here so that the whole team is on the same page about it. If there is a behavior intervention plan or a safety plan, that is likely a second document. You'll see it referenced in the IEP, but there will be a whole separate document usually where they talk about results of, a functional behavior assessment and reinforcement and motivation and safety concerns and things like that. Here are the goals I mentioned. So you'll always see area of needs. So that's like communication, social, emotional wellness. And then you'll have your broad goals, and then you'll have your objectives for reaching those. And then there's always a progress report. So you'll probably over time, like periodically get reports from the school with graphs of, what kind of progress is your child making, or what kind of support do they still need around certain goals. Here's where they might document like, no, child's too young to be taking state or district assessments, or, yeah, they are taking them and they need some accommodations, like maybe extended time. And then we're always documenting the services a child is getting. So either indirect services, which are more consultation that's happening at school between like a teacher and an OT, for example, or direct services, which is where your child is being likely pulled out of their gen ed classroom and given specialized instruction or therapy. Usually what I see is that they're putting the minutes per month rather than per week. And so you kind of have to do the math in your head of like, like my kid gets 120 minutes per month of speech therapy. What on earth does that mean weekly? And that's oftentimes, so it gives the school a little bit of leeway. Like if they couldn't pull your child for speech therapy one week, maybe they can pull them twice the next week, and they've got some flexibility there. And so you'll see the different services and the amount of time that the child is getting. And then you'll also see, I forgot to mention too, placement. So sometimes a child is placed in like maybe a moderate needs program, or maybe they're mostly in the general education setting. And here they should be clarifying the amount of time spent outside of the gen ed setting. All right, moving a little quickly because I feel like I might be taking a little more time than I meant to. Sorry, Tiffany. Okay, so what is IDEA? So IDEA is federal. It's a law that says, we can give services to children with specified disabilities and categories of disabilities, makes free and available appropriate education to children with disabilities. We cannot discriminate. We cannot isolate. They deserve to be at school and they deserve to have these additional supports. Also ensures your parent rights and the rights of your child with the disability receiving services. And then it defines those disabilities using certain categories, which don't always match outside diagnoses. So I've seen children qualify for autism in the educational setting, and then I'll do an evaluation. And it's like, no, it's, I medically am not giving an autism diagnosis, but educationally, they've been identified as having educational autism. If a child has developmental delays, medical needs, visual impairment, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment like ADHD falls under that, or some of those medical conditions, learning disability, speech or language impairment, and then multiple disabilities, like if a child has intellectual disability diagnosed with other things like maybe ADHD or medical needs, that would fall under multiple disabilities. So you'll always see a primary disability in the IEP in one of these 13 categories. Sometimes you will see a secondary disability, like maybe autism is primary, secondary is speech or language impairment. And that might be to support the child getting speech therapy in addition to maybe social skills support or something. Something else to know too is that it's really common that developmental delay is used for an IEP until a child is like 8 or 9 years old. If I do an evaluation and diagnose autism, especially before the age of 9, recommend the school consider going with that autism category, because that really further defines the support that that child needs. But if your child's getting support under developmental delay, also, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just something that they can't continue to use after 8 or 9 years old. All right. And then IEP versus 504 plan. This is also a really confusing topic. And I get this question all the time from parents of, do we request a 504, an IEP? What's the benefit? How do we know? And what do we ask for? And those are all really good questions. So I think what's most important to know is a 504 plan is not special education. It only falls under general education, meaning that if you have a 504 plan, you don't have all those same procedural safeguards and rights as under an IEP. Pros and cons to that, there are some children that just need a little bit of support, like maybe they need OT at school and maybe some accommodations like extended time for ADHD or something, but don't need that more intensive specialized instruction around like social skills or math or something like that. And that's okay. What I make sure parents know, though, is that for a 504 plan, the school doesn't have to make sure that your child is accessing those accommodations. And so what that means is, like, say you have an 8-year-old with a 504 plan with an accommodation that they need to ask for extended time or something, or ask to sit at the front of the class. Most 8-year-olds are not going to think to do that, or may feel scared or stigmatized or something advocating for those supports. And so then it's more important that the teachers and the parents are making sure that those accommodations are happening. Whereas with an IEP, those things really are guaranteed to be happening because that's that legal document of those services. Let's see, what else? I think a misconception with 504 plans too is that children can get therapies at school through a 504. So they can get speech therapy, they can get occupational therapy. They're just not getting that specialized instruction. Let's see, they don't include modifications. Like if your child's having trouble accessing the grade level curriculum, a 504 plan would not be appropriate. And then they can sometimes, follow, or they don't follow a child to college, but 504 plans are a little easier sometimes to translate to college because they're just some simple accommodations versus specialized instruction. Right. And I would say 504 plans are most common for ADHD. So when would you want an IEP versus a 504? Like I mentioned, if your child needs specialized instruction, that's definitely more appropriate for an IEP. If they need more comprehensive, intensive supports like transportation, communication devices, that's certainly an IEP as well. And if a child is having trouble advocating and accessing accommodations, then an IEP may be more appropriate too. And then real quickly, the parent rights that are important to know. So I've mentioned several of them kind of along the way, but I wanted to put this here for you to have for your own records, just to remember important things. So you have the right to participate in meetings. If there are changes to plans, placement, eligibility, you are absolutely a part of that process. You have a right to written notice, like if the plan or if the school is planning to change your child's IEP, or say he's no longer eligible for an IEP, like you have a right to know why and to have that documentation. You also have a right to consent or not consent to things. Just know if you don't consent to things that there could be other things that follow, like mediation or due process through a court to kind of help everybody come to an agreement. And then you have a right to amend the educational record, meaning the IEP. You have a right to have a copy of it. If something is incorrect in there, like your parent report or something, you have a right to have, request that be amended. And you have a right to share that with other people. You also have a right to a hearing. So if you feel like, like least restrictive environment is being violated, the IEP is being violated, you have a right to due process or mediation or an advocate or a lawyer, to come to an agreement. Let's see. And you have a right to information on disciplinary actions. I felt like this was important because I hear a lot, my child was suspended or, they've been expelled and I don't know why, like it was a surprise. There was no communication from the school before that about behavior and it just happened suddenly and it's very confusing. If your child has an IEP, there are federal guidelines around removal from the school system, which is a bigger topic for sure. But they can't just suspend or remove a child, from their IEP or the school system as they please. You have a right to be informed and knowledgeable about that. And then here are 3 big advocacy centers. You as a parent have a right to hire an advocate, hire a lawyer, like I said. I think what's important to know is the difference between a consultant and an advocate. From my understanding, is an advocate would come into the school system and help you have a voice in the process, whereas a consultant will meet with you personally and go through that process and help you make an educated decision or connect you to certain schools or other people that could be helpful as well. Okay, that was a lot. That was everything. I know that may have been information overload, but I think that those were the good basics to know. There is a lot to learn around IEPs and a lot to share, but I think that hit the highlights. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. There is so much to know and so many unique situations that happen and occur. So I did see a couple questions coming in. Please be sure to put it in the Q&A too. But so a parent has a child going from a SPED preschool class to a general ed kinder class, but still has delays in certain areas and can't integrate with his peers and teachers to get the work done and respond to his environment. Shouldn't they place him back in a SPED class since he shows signs of needing support versus waiting 30 days to see if the need is there?
You know, I have a few thoughts around that. So sometimes what I've seen is when a child is moving to a new school, especially pre-K to kindergarten is a big transition, not uncommon that that's a new school. The school might kind of feel it out, so to speak, for a month or two. And then around this time, around November, you know, someone is saying like, this isn't working. And so I think that it's important to go to that IEP team with that feedback and request that they look at that placement and whether or not that continues to be appropriate, because now you have 2 or 3 months worth of, you know, information kind of showing maybe it's not the best fit. And so I think evaluating placement is appropriate at this point.
So they would, okay, and what if in that same one, but if they change districts, then do I have to let the 30 days go by since there's going to be based off the IEP, or can I jump in and put the child back in a SPED class by requesting it? So if they happen to change the districts.
Not uncommon that when you change districts, they have a similar process as well. And it might be in that time of like, they're kind of feeling it out and they might be considering their own like new evaluation. IEPs don't always transfer well across schools or districts. And so you might see a reevaluation happening so that team can get a better feel for that child's needs in their school system. And so, you know, I would certainly advocate and just meet with that IEP team and talk about that. And they may do an evaluation. So don't feel like you have to wait.
Okay. And one, this is so helpful. Our family has had good experience with our IEP team and academic year program, but YSE or ESY has been really difficult. Do you have any suggestions on how to work with the school district on ESY? I think, I don't know if you say ESY, if it's called SE. But quality, accessible, or what else a family might have rights to and aim to prevent break regression.
You know, to be honest, I don't have any experience with ESY, and it's not something that I saw very often in my training. And so, sorry, the hard answer is I don't know. I just encourage you to talk to that team and share those concerns.
Okay. If my child needed accommodations for administration of medication, would that be an IEP or a 504 plan?
It could fall under either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Great information. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Let me see. I know there was some in the chat. Can a parent bring private psychological testing to the school district for consideration? I've heard a student at a private school can get testing services through the public school district. Is that the case? Is this the case?
I have seen that, and that's an interesting kind of area. So the private school themselves does not have to offer anything. However, because, well, let me take a step back. However, a child can still access services through the public school setting. So like they can still be entitled to an IEP and have those school providers come into the private school setting. It's just that the private school doesn't have to ensure that that happens. So it's kind of on the parent to say, go to that local public school district and kind of explore that eligibility and whether or not they'll come into that private school setting. Public school definitely has to consider the results of a private evaluation. Public schools don't.
Okay. There was a question about the laws around a district not having the specialist that your child needs and is in the IEP.
I see that a lot. That's a hard one. If it is in an IEP, it's not your child's fault nor your fault that the district doesn't have the people to deliver that service. If someone has determined that that service is necessary to the point that it's documented in an IEP, it should be given regardless. Sometimes there are delays or staffing shortages. Technically it's still supposed to be delivered and that's not your fault. And the school needs to be figuring that out to make sure your child is accessing that therapy.
Okay. Somebody asked, what is an ESY? I know that is an extended school year services and individualized instruction program for eligible students with disabilities. Anything else that I'm missing from that?
Yeah, so the big criteria for meeting eligibility for ESY is there has to be a proven history of the child losing gains or regressing or losing skills towards their IEP goals when there are school breaks. And so, summer break is a long break. Sometimes what happens is a child is making steady progress through the academic year, and then they come back in August or September, and then the IEP team realizes they've lost, some of what we've taught them. They've regressed, and now we need to work on lower level skills, for example. And then the team will say, you know what, we can't take breaks. This child needs consistent IEP instruction and service delivery. And so they will find providers to continue those services during school breaks so that there is not loss of skill.
So this is a great question. When the current staffing shortages in education, SPED, and other specialized services, we've experienced gaps in services, no speech therapists, like you said, being hired, loss of SPED teachers in early education. How oftentimes this happen, I feel like is the last to know. How soon should a parent be notified of these changes?
I don't know a specific timeline around that. I would believe it would be similar to early in that process, when you're consenting to an evaluation and you have 15 days to provide that consent. I would think that there's a similar window, and I recommend verifying that and reading the parent rights, but I would believe that there's a timeline around that. They can't just drop a service or not provide a service and then 3 months later tell you, right? Like that's definitely not appropriate. And so I would expect pretty quickly they're telling you, I just don't know how quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
A few other questions coming in. Do gifted kids and or 2E kids need an IEP or a 504? They're thinking maybe gifted plus ADHD.
I feel like what I see more often than not, if there's not another diagnosis, is what's called an advanced learning plan, which is not an IEP. So you don't have, federal laws or guidelines or anything around that, but it's an advanced learning plan saying like this child is performing above grade level in this area. Here's the advanced instruction that we will give them. However, if there is another diagnosis, that child could be considered twice exceptional, which there's no there's not a disability category for that necessarily. But certainly could qualify under maybe like other health impairment, or if there's autism, qualify under autism. And then that IEP looks a little different. And then you're talking about in very specific areas that child might need specialized support and instruction. But in these other areas, they're excelling. And here's also how we're going to meet their needs as a twice exceptional gifted child academically as well.
Wonderful. Here's a comment. This was fantastic. Thank you. You're a great public speaker. So
thank you
for that feedback. Yes, that was awesome. I live in rural Colorado. My local school district does not have resources staffing, especially similar to Metro Colorado. What would, and advocacy group be able to assist in an IEP draft review to ensure adequate recommendations?
Yes, I would believe so. And one place that I really recommend is the ARC of Colorado, because from what they told me, each county has their own ARC chapter. And so I would believe that that would apply rurally as well. And so the ARC is an excellent resource and place to start, especially if you're rural, because I feel like a lot of advocates are more so in the Denver area, which is hard, and may or may not do video services. And so I think there are places like the ARC that can support you with exactly that.
Okay. And I think we might have touched on this, but must a school hire a person for the missing specialist if the nearest specialist is hours away? And this is a rural area. I mean, yeah.
I mean, my understanding is if kind of similar to another answer I gave, you know, if the school is determined that that service is necessary, kind of like we talk with insurance, how something is medically necessary, you know, if the school has said in an IEP, educationally, this child has a disability, the service is required for them to access, you know, education and function in the school environment, they need to be doing it. It's not your problem how they find that provider, but they need to be finding that provider to be even legally giving those IEP minutes that they say that they're giving.
Well, and that goes to the answer, I think, on the next question, which is when a school does not have a qualified person to administer the recommended intervention, can they train a member of the staff? Yes, like if they have a member on the staff who needs to have the Orton-Gillingham training or certification. However, like you just said, the school goes about hiring, helping their current staff get the training that they needed. They can certainly go about doing that, especially when it comes to OG certified and training. That's something that anyone can do and get their training on. So anything else you want to add for that?
Yeah, nothing else, you know, and I think that it might be helpful to think about the model that I had in Iowa when I was working in Iowa, is that they didn't, like, no school district had internal mental health professionals or board certified behavior analysts. They contracted all of that out. And so I was an outside provider with an education agency coming in providing those services. And so it's certainly appropriate, you know, if it is someone that's doing a specialized therapy, they do need to be certified or licensed, and that's important for state requirements. But they can certainly train a teacher in the classroom to maybe provide a certain accommodation or social skills instruction or support, you know, and that's appropriate.
One last question, then we'll shut it out. But why are schools generally reluctant to provide students with proper support?
Yeah, a lot of answers probably to that one. You know, I think what I hear most is, you know, related to some of these questions of the school feels like they have limited resources. And so they might be hesitant. Schools sometimes also have guidelines from higher up in the district of that if a child is not performing 10th percentile, 4th percentile, because they're so overwhelmed with the number of kids that need support that they might say, hard cutoff, if you're not 10th percentile or below, we can't accommodate, we can't help you. At a more intensive level. Sometimes schools also think that they can maybe provide a simple intervention and that will kind of remediate or alleviate that difficulty. And so they might say, no, an IEP is not needed. Just let us do an intervention. What other things have I seen? I hear this more so related to autism. Parents tell me all the time, you know, my child has an IEP, but they won't give my child occupational therapy unless they have an autism diagnosis. I'm like, why, you know? And I think it comes down to staff. There are so many kids that need something like occupational therapy that they've had to come up with certain guidelines maybe around it of, no, we're not going to even consider until you have such and such diagnosis. I don't personally feel like that's how it should work. If regardless of diagnosis, a child needs occupational therapy and we're identifying and we're agreeing on that, why are we not enabling that access to that? So that's my opinion. Yeah.
Well, there's so much. Dr.
Yeah.
Banks, thank you so much for being here. I know we could talk weeks, days, hours on this topic. There's so much to cover out there. I appreciate everyone for your time jumping in. I hope this was helpful. As I put in the chat, I will be sending out the presentation along with a copy of the recording, and that'll go out sometime this week. So Hopefully, again, that is helpful information. If there are other topics, as I mentioned earlier, that you want to hear about, learn about, I have so many amazing professionals that are just willing, wanting to share their knowledge, their experiences, and would love to provide and bring that to you. So let me know. I hope you all have an amazing afternoon, and we will see you again soon. Thanks, Dr. Banks. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.